Hi, I'm Walker Robertson, and I'm here today with my grandmother, Joan Robertson, to interview about the Vietnam War. What were you doing in 1955 when the war first started?
In 1955, I was getting ready to marry Walker's grandfather and to go back to school with him so he could finish his master's degree in engineering, and I went to work to help support the family.
Was the media for the war or against it at first, and did they change?
I believe that the media was not for the war. They probably questioned, like the rest of us, what in heaven's name are we doing over there? So I don't think they ever were in favor of it. If nothing else, their hatred of it got worse.
Did the media report more graphically than today? Did they include all the deaths and um, footage or numbers about the bombings and deaths?
I think the numbers were probably very important in those days because I don't think we have had the news coverage at that point in time that we have today when they're in your face constantly. Um, I think numbers were very important to them, whether it was how many of our boys were killed, how many Vietnamese were killed, how many Vietnamese were killed by their own people.
Were there protests you remember seeing on the television?
I'm sure there were more protests than I was aware of. Uh, the big one was Kent State massacre, where people, if you even mention it today, they will say, I have no idea why that happened. That was the most cruel thing to go after a bunch of college students. They had a right to protest, and I honestly don't understand what the police were told they were supposed to do.
How did you feel the presidents handled the war? Who was the best and who was the worst? The presidents at the time were Eisenhower, JFK, LBJ, and Nixon.
I think in the midst of this war and then the assassination of JFK, um, it just threw another monkey wrench in it and made it even much more worse. Um, how he would have handled it the last couple of years of his life, I don't know, but I think he had a grasp because he was younger, and I I don't know that the people that followed him had much of a choice because by then the American public was so anti-war. Um, I think they probably focused on the assassination of JFK. Those after him, some people say LBJ was good, but he had to pick up at a bad time in that era.
Do you remember being mad at the government?
Yes, man, that we were. What were we doing there? We were sent our young men off to men, women off to war, and what right did we have to try to interfere with what was happening over there? I don't think we saved many lives when you look at the statistics. Yes.
How do you remember hearing about the Kent State massacre? Did it escalate tension between police and citizens?
I think with the police going after the students, not really giving them a reason, or giving us, the rest of the public, a good reason why, I think you could very easily distrust anybody who was in a police uniform for what they did to these students.
How did you feel about the foreigners in the country at this time?
I personally had no problem with them. Uh, we we had friends who were Indian, and a few other nationalities that we became best friends, especially when my husband was in college. We had no fight with them.
Did you get tired of the war? And then when was this point?
Yes, I think when it dragged on, and until I think I started doing this, I didn't realize that it had gone on for 20 years. It wasn't in our country, so I wasn't as affected as I could have been if they were down the street fighting. I think 2 or 3 years might have been enough, but apparently it wasn't. There were too many hatreds and different groups that were fighting within this battle.
Were you ever scared about the war, or did you always feel that the U.S. had it under complete control?
No, I don't think, if it had been a long time ago, I would have said, yes, our men are the best. But I'm not certain the kind of direction that they were given. I think they needed better leadership to make this work and make us think that we were going to really win this battle.
And did you think the music, TV shows, or radio programs changed with the war? And how did they change?
For those who like excitement, maybe war stories, war films would have become more popular. Yes, I think we did change, and I'm not so much into the music picture, but I'm pretty sure that the words and the thoughts changed.
And looking back, how do you view the war? How do you view the war? Was it still completely unnecessary?
Personally, I think it was unnecessary. I'm not certain why we had to be there.
What was the most memorable event you have from the Vietnam War?
When all the boys came marching home. Really, I think if I had been a parent of a young man or woman who was in this military, I would have been praying every day for them to come home.
At your church, were there groups for veterans coming back, or do you remember any other help from? At your church, were there groups for veterans coming back? Was there any help for the veterans that you remember?
I don't believe there was a lot of help. I think the gentlemen stuck together because they know what they had been through, and they realized that the American public was not happy with them at all. So they kind of had each other to back them up.
There were many people who were conscientious objectors and chose not to fight in the war. What was your take on this? Were they loyal or just exercising their rights?
I think they were exercising their rights, but I also know that there were quite a few, and I do not have a number, that chose to go to Canada to avoid being drafted. They wanted no parts of the war. I think one of our biggest stars, Jane Fonda, kind of helped turn people against the war. She was so anti, and she went all over preaching about how bad we were and the fact that we were in the war where we shouldn't be.
How were the veterans treated once they got back?
I believe they were treated very poorly. People didn't see the reason why we had been there, and I think a lot of people lost sight of the fact that they were asked to be there. They were fulfilling a duty and obligation as an American citizen. I met a young man the other day who had been in the war. He'd been all over the world during that war, and he had been in, I believe, a parade when a man and lady came up to him and the woman spit all over him. And he was so upset that he told me he just made a fist and he punched out the man. Now, he hadn't done it, but he said he was told never to hit a woman or a child. And the woman shouted at him she was going to call the police, and he said, go right ahead, I'll stay here and wait. And I know she's not the only one. There were anti-war signs and anti-military men all over the place. And it certainly didn't make them feel good. And they had each other to lean on because they know the horrors they had seen.
Thank you for your time.
You're welcome.